Here are 4 grannies reacting to court sentences for their appalling crimes. Whenever we think of a grandmother, we picture a smiling woman with a heart full of love and compassion, and an uncontrollable desire to feed everyone around her. However, some grandmothers are not so warm and cuddly, just like the first convict on our list. Number 1. Vonda Smith. This is 60-year-old Vonda Smith, who was tried in the Greene County Courthouse for double murders. Her story will leave you speechless. The unfortunate incident happened in the quiet town of Greenville, Tennessee, which only has a population of 15,000. The town's only claim to fame is its rare spelling and the fact that President Andrew Johnson began his political career there. As you can imagine, when news of a murder started circulating on August 12, 2016, the community was thrilled and scared at the same time. The body of 21-year-old mother of 2, Jessica Nicole Morrison, was found brutally beaten to death that night, and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation determined that a blunt object assaulted her. They also found the victim was pregnant. Imagine everyone's surprise when 7 months later, the police arrested Vonda Smith and charged her with 2 counts of first-degree murder. What made matters more shocking was Smith's relationship with the victim. She was the grandmother of one of Morrison's kids, who was fathered by her son, William. What do you think pushed Smith to kill the mother of her grandson? When the case went to court, significant evidence popped up against the evil granny, who was upset with Morrison for not letting her spend enough time with her grandson. Text messages that indicated Smith's agitation and anger weakened her case, along with the fact that she was the last person to see Morrison. She even lent the 21-year-old her car the evening she was murdered, which was later found covered in blood. Despite Smith's pleas, Judge F.M. Duggar Jr. couldn't ignore the extensive evidence against her. He maintained that Smith's crimes were heinous and had caused Morrison's family irreversible loss. Severe lacerations to her skull and fracture on the top of her skull. She trusted being with you as opposed to being with a stranger, and bad things happened. This murder happened after that. Smith's defense attorney pleaded for a more convenient sentence considering her minimal criminal record, but the judge wasn't convinced. Smith could be seen crying when Morrison's mother delivered a heart-wrenching victim impact statement. But despite her show of emotions during the speech, Smith kept a blank face when Judge Duggar sentenced her to life in prison for first-degree murder, followed by the maximum penalty of 25 years for the second-degree murder charge. If you thought this grandmother was heartless, you'd never believe what 72-year-old Sandra Lane did to her grandson. Number 2. Sandra Lane. People usually say that it's the kids who suffer the most during a divorce, but Jonathan Hoffman lost his life as his parents left him in the care of his grandmother. Jonathan was a 17-year-old smart and funny kid who planned to attend Eastern Michigan University. When his parents' relationship hit a rough patch in 2012, life took an unexpected turn for him. In addition to a looming divorce, his sister was diagnosed with a brain tumor, which forced them to move to Arizona, but not before leaving Jonathan with his grandmother. For a young boy battling depression, Jonathan resorted to marijuana to cope with the pressures of his bleak reality, but his grandmother wasn't too happy with his actions. On May 18, 1012, Jonathan tested positive for drugs, and that's when Sandra decided she had had enough. Can you imagine what she did next? Send him to rehab. That would have been the sensible reaction, but Sandra was seething with anger and wanted to teach her grandson a lesson. The same night as Jonathan was getting dressed to head out, the two got into a heated argument in which Jonathan refused to back down. Making sure she was alone with him, Sandra reached for her handgun and threatened Jonathan with it. The young boy immediately became defensive, but Sandra shot him twice in the chest regardless. At that point, she ran out of bullets and went downstairs to get more. Wounded but still alive, Jonathan called 911 and pleaded for help, but Sandra returned to the room while he was still talking. As Jonathan screamed for help, she pulled the trigger again, this time taking his life. She shot at him 10 times in 6 minutes, hitting him 6 times. The shocking murder sent chills down everyone's spine. Why do you think Sandra killed her grandson? During the disturbing trial, Sandra admitted to shooting Jonathan, but in self-defense. She also blamed his parents for her violent actions. According to her, Jonathan's parents dumped him on her, and she didn't want him to say. His drug usage worsened matters, as he became unmanageable for Sandra, who killed him to protect herself. The moving 911 audio recording was the final straw in Jonathan's case. And even though Sandra was sobbing while listening to it in court, her crime was too severe for a lenient sentence. She was convicted of second-degree murder. Now that's a truly evil nanny. But the next grandma on our list exceeds even Sandra in her callous and brutal behavior. Number 3, Cynthia Cedarbaka. Cynthia Cedarbaka, a 65-year-old grandma who mercilessly murdered her 53-year-old son-in-law because he commented on how she dressed. Surprised? It all started when Gerward Estacio made snide comments to the granny on the back patio of the family's upscale home in a Fallbrook community. Enraged by his words, she went to her flat, grabbed her gun, and ambushed Estacio as he carried laundry. Within 10 minutes, she repeatedly emptied her 5-shot gun, twice going to her car for more bullets. Satisfied with Estacio's dead body sprawled on the kitchen floor, Cedarbaka decided to go out and celebrate her birthday at a local diner. After feasting on her favorite bacon and eggs, she ditched the gun and headed to a Temecula casino, where she stayed for 2 hours. When the detective finally got to her later that afternoon, Cedarbaka was enjoying herself at a Fallbrook coffee shop. During custody, she made an epic confession that's hard to forget. Cedarbaka showed no remorse whatsoever for her crime, but was in fact grateful that her son-in-law was dead. Why do you think she did it? Was it really because of a single negative comment? Here's the other side of the story nobody tells. Cedarbaka's daughter confessed that her husband used to verbally and physically assault her and spray family members with water if they misbehaved. He once broke his teen son's expensive electronics, and wait for it, even threw out the urn containing the ashes of Cedarbaka's late husband. It seems like something snapped in Cedarbaka's head, and all the years' pent-up frustration poured out in an instant. She thought she was protecting her daughter and grandchildren in a way, but the same grandchildren refused even to meet her after she confessed to the gruesome murder. Cedarbaka's daughter was overcome with grief as she was mourning for her husband's death and her mother's imprisonment, both of whom she dearly loved. Estacio's sister also delivered a passionate statement in court. Despite her jubilant confession, Cedarbaka apologized for her actions and was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison following an emotional hearing in Vista Superior Court. If you thought these grandmas were evil, wait until you see the next grandpa who took violence to a whole new level. Number 4, Joseph James D'Angelo. This is Joseph James D'Angelo, a grandfather named the Golden State Killer for a series of heinous crimes. A former police officer, Joseph James D'Angelo, was 74 when he was arrested in 2018 and charged with 13 murders, 50 rapes, and nearly 60 home invasions. D'Angelo's reign of violence during the 1970s and 80s affected almost 106 victims. Are you wondering how D'Angelo evaded arrest for so long, even after committing countless horrendous crimes? It was because he moved from state to state, from Sacramento to Orange County, and assumed a new title for his crimes everywhere he went. Over the course of his life, he earned the titles the Cordova Cat Burglar, the Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, the Creek Killer, the Diamond Knot Killer, and the original Night Stalker. Are you ready for a peek into his brutal crimes? D'Angelo used to bludgeon dogs to death in the same manner as people, with a log. He was known to lock children in bathrooms or tie them to a headboard while he repeatedly raped their mothers. Sometimes his attack lasted for hours, and he would rape and sodomize women again and again. He didn't spare the men, but tortured them until they snapped. He would force them to balance perfume bottles on their backs and threaten to cut their wives' and girlfriends' ears should they topple. When D'Angelo was presented in court, the tension and sadness inside the room was palpable. One after another, victims and their families delivered emotional impact statements that moved everyone in the courtroom to tears. After the victim impact statements, D'Angelo rose from his wheelchair, removed his face mask, and said the unthinkable.
I've listened to all your statements, each one of them. And I'm truly sorry to everyone I've hurt. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir.
However, they maintained that D'Angelo deserved the most severe punishment for his violent actions, as he had enjoyed a normal life, even after destroying others. The court sentenced D'Angelo to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but the verdict didn't move D'Angelo since he had already expected it coming. If you thought these granny reactions were insane, you'd never believe how these Karens reacted when they were crushed in court by karma.